Li Bai, Clear and Bright Tunes, number 3. The most famous flower, the most beautiful woman, each admires the other. Whenever their king looks at them, he cannot help but smile. So he lets go of that sad feeling the spring breezes bring, and leans against the north railing, sunk in their perfume. So we continue with the third and last of this group of 3 quatrains dedicated to the praise of Yang Guifei in a certain specific historical meeting which takes place between Li Bai, the emperor's favorite concubine, and the emperor himself. Now, this is very similar to the previous poems, but there's a slight difference, which is in this poem we see the presence of the emperor. In the previous poems we had, in the 2 first poems of the series, we had this appraisal of Yang Guifei as the most beautiful lady of all. In both of them, and in this one, you have her comparison, explicit or implicit, with flowers. But there, you only had Yang Guifei as the protagonist and the character of the scene. There were references, evocations of ghostly beauties from the remote past, or of goddesses, also of mythology. But, Yang Guifei occupied center stage. In this take, which also praises the beauty of Yang Guifei, the emperor appears. He was a silent viewer in the previous poems, but here he is actually depicted. So he's here, he's enjoying the flowers, and he's enjoying Yang Guifei. Okay, so I think nothing else has to be added to the topic of the poem. It's a poem of praise for a woman, a beautiful and a very specific one, and it's an impromptu composition of the type that was pretty typical of Tang poetry. Tang poetry had a lot of poems that were written on imperial command, like poetry was one of the qualifications expected in a cultured and an educated scholar official, and a lot of the creativity associated with poetry was not basically just those individuals writing other topics they felt were interesting, but rather in courtly scenes, in banquets, in state events, the emperor would expect some of the scholar officials present to be able to compose poetry impromptu, and basically giving them a little bit of time and maybe a topic. And also very common, we've encountered this, is poetry harmonizing the rhymes of a previous poem. Like someone recites a poem and you answer back with a poem that has a similar subject matter, and also it parallels the rhymes of the original poem. So this is the sort of fancy courtly type of poetry that was part and parcel of Tang poetic life. Anyway, let's go and take a look at the poem couplet by couplet, as we usually do. So, first couplet: the most famous flower, the most beautiful woman, each admires the other. Whenever their king looks at them, he cannot help but smile. So, an interesting thing here, you get the juxtaposition. Instead of the metaphor or the association, here you get the juxtaposition, as if they were 2 different colors, 2 different pictures in a mirror, but distinctive figures nevertheless. There's the most famous flower and the most beautiful woman. And probably the flower, as we said, is probably the peony, which is the favorite flower in Tang Dynasty China. And they're appreciating each other, as both are beautiful. Find it interesting in the original. So if you look and you try to make a character by character translation, you get something like: the winning flower, the kingdom toppler, both each other happy pleased. So the reference to Yang Guifei is, the poet is calling her a kingdom toppler. And you will remember what we have mentioned of the description of kingdom or city toppling beauties, a reference already present in the Book of Odes in the Shijing, but which, it's a popular standard phrase for referring to a very beautiful woman, but it also has some ominous connotations as the dangerous the attractive and sometimes evil woman that distracts the emperor from his duties. But anyway, we've got the flower, we've got the woman. And there's a third person, a third party, who is looking and enjoying the beauty of both. Whenever the king looks at them, he cannot help but smile. The ruler smiles. The king smiles when he looks at both of them and enjoys the beauty of both of them. Second couplet. So the first couplet, I wouldn't say that it sets the scene, but it sets the picture with the three characters, the flower, the woman, the emperor. And the second couplet really moves away, focuses on the emperor himself and what he is doing, although depending on how you translate the poem, you might imagine that he is doing those things while having the beauty and the flowers by his side. So second couplet, so he lets go of that sad feeling the spring breezes bring, and leans against the north railing, sunk in the perfume. Okay, so spring is the season of love, but in a lot of Chinese poems, even though it would be presumably the season of happiness, it's generally a sad season because it also, a lot of poems take place in spring when lovers or friends are parted, and the jarring inadequacy of the separation of loved ones in spring makes that separation doubly poignant. Here there is no separation, we have just this beautiful scene, the scene of extreme happiness, of gayness. So there's no bound to the emperor's pleasure. You might imagine that the spring breeze might connote, I don't know why the spring breeze would bring sad feelings alongside it. In fact, I think other translations follow a different line in which the spring wind is just moving, and it's not the source of suffering or pain, but maybe the idea is nobody suffers if the spring wind just moves away instead of remaining with us, the nice soothing winds of spring, because the emperor is so happy at being in such a wonderful place with such wonderful people that he is indifferent to anything else. So what does he do? He lets go of the sad feeling the spring breezes bring and leans against the north railing, sunk in the perfume. So the emperor is probably in some sort of structure, in some sort of pavilion, contemplating the scene. He leans against the north railing. So in traditional Chinese cosmology, the emperor has to always be at the north, looking south. And this was transplanted to city design. So for example, in Chang'an, the imperial capital, it's a big square with an avenue that cuts it into two equal geometric parts. And at the northern end of the avenue, there's another rectangular space where the imperial palace is. So the emperor, and when it's not the emperor, the person in authority is meant to be looking south. That's how the ruler sits. He sits in the north, looking south. So he's in this pavilion against the north railing because he is behind the railing, looking south. And he leans there and, he just enjoys the perfume. Not only are the flower and Yang Guifei a pleasure to the sense of sight, they're also a pleasure to the sense of smell, and presumably to all of the other senses, to the ears because of their singing, at least in the case of Yang Guifei, to touch, and so on. So he just lets go of any ominous background thoughts, and he enjoys the perfume of these ladies, of the flower lady and of the real lady. So quite a conventional piece. I would say that even if it's inadvertent, the slight ominous touches that this poem hints us towards, both in the reference to the kingdom toppling lady and in that sad spring breeze, even if it's inadvertent, they do seem to be easily decoded after what we know of Yang Guifei's fate as, as premonitions, as poetic premonitions coming out of Li Bai's genius, as some sort of ominous presages of the end of this beautiful and happy state in which the emperor was dwelling here. Okay, and let's take a look at two other translations of this poem. First one by Ha Jin in his biography of Li Bai, The Banished in Moro. And his goes like this. The flowers and the rapturous beauty shine on each other. They make His Majesty smile when he looks at them. The breeze blows away all his worries as he and she lean over a rail at the fragrant pavilion. So very similar poem, but maybe the difference here is that the last line is not just a reference to what the emperor is doing. He is with her, with his lady, leaning on the balustrade or on the rail at this pavilion. And finally, Witter-Binner's version goes like this. Lovely now together, his lady and his flowers, lighten forever the emperor's eye, as he listens to the sighing of the far spring wind, where she leans on a railing in the aloe pavilion. So again, here you get another change in the last line. Yeah. So like in the three other poems, in the third line, it's the emperor who is listening to the wind, but he's also looking out at the woman. It's not him, or it's not him or her, it's just her who is leaning on a railing in the aloes pavilion.